Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, your window into relationships, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines. And this is a trauma-informed leadership series episode. And I'm your host, Krista Fee. And today we are stepping into one of the most misunderstood, over-glorified, and dangerously prolific ideas in leadership culture: grit. For much of the 20th century, resilience in leadership was framed as toughness. The hero was the one who could grind through sleepless nights, who never showed weakness, who projected composure no matter the cost. Leaders were celebrated not for their renewal, but for their endurance and their willingness to suffer longer than anyone else. And this narrative is so seductive. It appeals to our admiration for strength. It sounds super noble, even heroic. But that's not the lived reality. Grit without recovery isn't really resilience. It's depletion, exhaustion, and eventually inevitable burnout. So I want to share a story with you about the CEO who never slept. I once consulted with the CEO who bragged that he survived on 4 hours of sleep a night. He was so proud of his endless grind, and for years people admired him until his decision-making collapsed. He started missing details. He grew irritable with his team. His health began to deteriorate. And eventually he had a stress-related heart event that nearly killed him. The myth of endless grit made him look unstoppable until it stopped him, and his team learned a painful lesson. Toughness without renewal eventually breaks down. So let's talk about this myth of grit in leadership. Angela Duckworth's research on grit defined it as the place where passion and perseverance intersect. And it's been widely cited as the predictor of achievement. But here's the problem. Our culture misread it. Duckworth's framework emphasizes passion with perseverance tethered to purpose. But in popular culture, grit was stripped down into one thing: relentless striving. The story became just push harder, just grind longer, just endure more. And if you collapse, it means you're weak. But neuroscience tells us the opposite. Leaders who grind without pause are building on a crumbling foundation that eventually collapses. The neuroscience of stress and recovery. Let's take a look at the brain and body next, as this is a podcast that takes a holistic view. Stress itself isn't the enemy. In fact, short bursts of stress sharpen focus and mobilize resources. Think of the adrenaline rush before a big speech or a first responder racing to a call. That stress fuels action. The danger comes when stress is chronic and unrelenting. When leaders never pause, the nervous system loses flexibility. Instead of moving fluidly between activation and recovery, the system gets stuck in survival mode, that fight, flight, or freeze state. Chronic stress literally shrinks the brain's hippocampus. This is where your memory and learning processes happen. It weakens immune function and hijacks the prefrontal cortex. This is your decision-making, logical thinking mind. Leaders under constant grind don't become sharper. They literally become less focused, less capable, more distracted, and even less intelligent. This is why resilience requires cycles of breakdown and renewal. Just like the phoenix doesn't endure the flames unchanged, it dies and is reborn. Leaders must allow fire to strip away what's unnecessary so they can emerge transformed. I love giving you fun glimpses into powerful historical figures that illustrate these concepts. So let's look into Winston Churchill's naps. Winston Churchill, who led Britain through World War II, was famous for his toughness. But here's a really fun piece of trivia that people rarely know about. He insisted on taking afternoon naps. Churchill said that nature has not intended man to work from 8 in the morning until midnight. His discipline of rest allowed him to endure years of war leadership. He understood what modern neuroscience now confirms. Resilience isn't the absence of rest. Resilience is impossible without it. Now I want to give you a real-world example from my office. A firefighter that I worked with once told me proudly that he'd gone 72 hours without sleep during wildfire season. He pushed through sheer grit. But on the third day, he passed out behind the wheel of his truck, narrowly avoiding a crash. And afterwards, he admitted, "I thought resilience meant never stopping. Now I realize that resilience means knowing when to stop." First responders know grit, but the ones who last know recovery. And if you know me, you know I've metaphor above most. There's a reason that it's used as our brand. Let's break down the phoenix as a model of resilience. The phoenix doesn't survive fire by pretending it's invincible. It doesn't white knuckle through the flames unchanged. It collapses, it dies, it's reduced to ashes, and then it rises differently, transformed. This is the deepest truth of resilience. It's not about pretending the fire doesn't burn. It's about letting that fire refine you, strip away what's unnecessary, and then choosing to emerge wiser, stronger, and new. Resilience is not about surviving the same. It's about learning to rise up differently. So let's explore the shadow side of endless grit. What happens when leaders cling to the myth of toughness? They transmit exhaustion to their organizations. They confuse urgency with vision. They make poor and sometimes dangerous decisions, mistaking stubbornness for strength. And even worse, unhealed trauma often hides behind endless grit. Leaders use grind as avoidance. If I never stop, I never have to face my wounds. But the body always keeps score. Leaders who refuse recovery don't just burn themselves out. They scorch everyone around them. So looking at this conversation through a trauma lens, why do we cling to this idea of grit? For trauma survivors, grit can feel like safety. Pushing harder becomes a shield against vulnerability. If I never stop, I don't have to feel. If I never rest, I don't risk being abandoned. If I never slow down, no one sees the cracks. But here's the paradox. Grit without recovery isn't strength, it's just avoidance. And what we're avoiding is going to catch up to us eventually. Trauma-informed leadership recognizes that resilience requires facing the ashes, not outrunning them. So using resilience as recovery, the forgotten discipline. Recovery is not indulgence. It's physiologically necessary. Sleep recalibrates your brain. It consolidates your memories and restores decision-making abilities. Exercise flushes stress hormones and stabilizes moods. Contemplative practices like meditation or prayer downshift the nervous system. Restorative relationships signal safety and belonging. Leaders who treat recovery as optional will eventually collapse. Leaders who treat recovery as discipline remain supple, adaptive, and clear. Now let's talk about using resilience as growth and going beyond bouncing back. Resilience isn't just bouncing back. It's also about moving forward. Psychologists Tedeschi and Calhoun call this post-traumatic growth. The positive changes that emerge after struggle. A deeper appreciation for life, stronger relationships, maybe even a renewed sense of purpose. Leaders who metabolize adversity through meaning making, support, and reflection don't just survive, they grow. Betrayal sharpens discernment, loss deepens empathy, public failure teaches humility. The phoenix rises different because of the fire, not in spite of it. But let's be honest, not everyone rises. Some leaders emerge from crisis not wiser, but embittered. Neuroscience shows that trauma without integration narrows attention to threats, fuels anger, and erodes empathy. Leaders in this state lead from resentment instead of principle, and history offers us sobering reminders. After World War I, humiliation and collapse fueled vengeance instead of growth. Entire nations rose not in wisdom, but in bitterness, and the world paid the price. The phoenix metaphor warns us, fire is powerful, but it does not guarantee rebirth. The choice is yours, whether flames refine or devour. So how can we redefine resilience for leaders today? What does it mean to redefine resilience? Looking beyond endurance. True resilience is not stoic grit, but the ability to bend, rest, and recovery. Adaptive flexibility, the capacity to pivot when demands change. Transformational growth, seeing wounds as pathways to wisdom. Disciplined recovery, rest and reflection as leadership imperatives, and embracing the shadow. True resilience doesn't deny pain or exile wounds. It faces them, integrates them, and refuses to let bitterness or fear secretly drive decisions. This is resilience redefined. Not grind, not endless grit, but phoenix-like transformation. Anyone who's been with me or heard more than a few podcast episodes knows that I've faced many of my own fire moments. I've had seasons where I brought the myth of grit, where I pushed harder, slept less, and tried to prove strength by refusing to bend. And every time the fire stripped me down until I had no choice but to rise different. And those seasons taught me this. Resilience isn't about pretending the flames don't burn. It's about trusting that the ashes can grow something new. Everything is an opportunity for growth if we're willing to see it that way. But growth only comes in nourished soil that has proper light and nutrients. So here are a few practical anchors for building real resilience that lasts. Schedule your recovery as seriously as you schedule meetings. Ask yourself, am I pushing from vision or from fear? Practice micro recoveries throughout the day, every day. Take moments of breath, presence, or stillness, maybe even gratitude. And surround yourself with people who remind you that rest isn't weakness, that rest is wisdom. When you want to do some self-check-in, ask yourself these questions and be honest. Where in my leadership am I mistaking endless grit for resilience? What recovery practices am I neglecting? How has fire in my life refined me? And how am I rising differently because of it? So let's make it a priority to stop pushing ourselves into exhaustion and burnout and start rising because of the fire. Because resilience isn't about surviving unscathed. It's about rising transformed. The phoenix doesn't rise in spite of the fire. It rises because of it. And the same is true for us leaders. And if you're in the flames right now, hear me. Resilience doesn't mean pretending it doesn't hurt. It means allowing the fire is there to shape you, strip away what's not essential, and prepare you to rise differently. So thank you for joining me today on Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines. This is a trauma-informed leadership series episode. And if this episode challenged you, share it forward, because the more leaders redefine resilience, the more our communities can trust, heal, and rise up. And if you want to bring trauma-informed leadership into your life, your organization, or your community, use the link in the show notes to schedule your free consultation with me and join the Rise Up Trauma-Informed Leadership course and community today.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up movement today.